welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into another one of the beers I got at the Wicked Weed bottle shop in Asheville over winter break. This is another one of the barrel-aged Guilty Pleasures line. Today's specific flavor is Espresso Cheesecake. It is an Imperial Pastry Stout that clocks in at 12.2% ABV. This one was brewed with coffee and vanilla, and Wicked Weed is based in Asheville, North Carolina. So, just like the last one, it's just got a very simple design. This one kind of has a brown theme going on, but otherwise it looks the same, other than it tells you the ABV on the specific beer and the additives. So, calling this Espresso Cheesecake, I guess we'll see. You know, it's got coffee and vanilla added. That would be kind of a tricky thing to impart in my mind without having lactose and or at least some cream cheese or something. But we'll see. I imagine this is still going to be a good beer. Whether or not I would consider it aptly named, neither here nor there, we will soon find out. So we got it cracked. I'm going to pour it straight in the old stout glass. This is, again, dark. You know, it's pouring kind of thick, but not super thick. And it's going to have no problem forming a head in this glass. Last one formed beautifully as well. So that's a boon. You don't always get that when they're poured at home, and it's quite nice when it does occur. Visually, absolutely pitch black, just like the last one, and just as you would expect on a big Imperial Stout. So this did form a nice, thick, creamy head, just like the last one of these lines. Again, it smells like it's a whiskey or a bourbon barrel-aged beer. Yeah, that really jumps out at me. The coffee and the vanilla, you can smell them. Almost equal parts coffee and vanilla, so quite clear they did add them in there. And just as with the last beer of this line, I can smell the underlying roasty malt bill. So no surprises here in the aroma. It's quite pungent. Even through this big, thick, creamy head, it smells exactly as I expected, like a barrel-aged pastry stout that's got added coffee and vanilla, exactly as advertised. So the head is settled down nearly to about half its height, so we're sitting somewhere around, I don't know, half an inch deep in there, so I may make a mess in my beard, but we're just going to go ahead and jump right in and see what this one's about. So take one. Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's really nice. Okay. So, as always, we'll start with the body and the mouthfeel. The body on this one feels kind of a medium heavyish, so roughly where I'd expect on a 12.2% ABV Imperial Stout. Feels about right. Mouthfeel is resistant. You can feel the resistance in there, and I feel like this was the same in the first one I had as well. It doesn't get creamy, it doesn't get foamy, it doesn't feel silky. You can just feel the resistance of it as it moves around the mouthfeel, as it moves around the palate. And it does do a very good job of coating the palate. So yeah, it's got a nice weight to it, and it's got a nice bit of resistance to it, which makes sense for a 12.2% Imperial Stout. So on the flavor profile, really no punches pulled here. It's exactly as advertised. Clearly barrel-aged. Again, I don't know the specific barrel, but it tastes of whiskey. Could be bourbon whiskey, could be standard whiskey, but it tastes like whiskey barrel aging to me. It smells like it too. So yeah, the spirit side of it is quite noticeable. There's not really a warming sensation on this one as it goes down, but you can taste the spirit right up front. It does taste of whiskey. And yeah, they added vanilla in this, so it would be tough to say if I think it's bourbon whiskey or not, because bourbon often imparts nice bits of vanilla underpinnings and caramelized sugar. I'm not really getting caramelized sugar in this one, but the vanilla is quite prevalent, but that's an added ingredient in this. So it is what it is. The coffee is also quite clear. It definitely leads with equal parts the barrel, the coffee, and the vanilla. They all are almost on a dead even playing ground. Of course, you do get that immediate punch of the barrel up front, and then it pulls back, and the coffee and vanilla are readily apparent right alongside it, almost completely on an equal footing, equal parts. A third there, a third there, a third there. It's very, very nice. The balance, in particular, is quite good. In terms of the underlying malt bill sense I'm getting out of this, the last one I remember if I recall correctly, I don't think it had a super roasty leaning malt bill. This one does, and at least that's how it comes across on my palate. This could easily be due in part to the fact that it added coffee, which already has more roasty leaning flavor quality to it. And yes, of course, I taste coffee, but there's that underlying richness and earthiness and roastiness that could easily start to bleed in to flavor compounds that you would taste from the underlying malt bill. But either way, regardless of where the catalyst is, for what I'm tasting, it tastes fantastic. Indeed, this tastes like a richer, deeper beer than I recall the German chocolate cake one tasting. It's got a more roasty sense to the malt bill. And it's really quite nice. So in general, yeah, exactly kind of what I was thinking it was going to be, though my initial impression of how would they pull this off to mimic cheesecake with just these two ingredients in a pastry stout with no lactose, it doesn't really remind me of cheesecake. You know, it's a nomenclature thing. They called it what they wanted to call it. Good marketing, I guess. But it's a very, very tasty beer. It's a very well done Imperial Pastry Stout. So that's facts. So I'm going to jump back in for a second sip, let everything re-intensify, see if I missed anything. We already talked about the balance, so we really just have to tackle the finish. But take two. Nice punch of that barrel up front. Pulls back. Coffee and vanilla immediately start to rise in tandem with the underlying malt bill. I really do feel like in this beer, it's the coffee that is giving me this driver, this impetus for what I am thinking is bringing out really nice, roasty, earthy underpinning notes from the malt bill. Of course, I could be wrong. It could be the malt bill itself, but I don't remember that in the German chocolate cake variety. And it would maybe be, not that they couldn't, but if they were going to make a bunch of different flavored lines of the same beer, it would maybe be a bit atypical if they decided to greatly tweak the malt bill. If I were a brewer and I were brewing a line of things like that, I would keep the same base and just do different additions for the different flavors. Not saying that's what they did, that's just how I would do it. It would be the most cost-effective means and the simplest way of doing it. But regardless, it really does put me in mind of a much more roasty leaning malt bill sense out of it. Yes, the coffee flavor and the side of it is very prevalent and it's kind of doing its own thing, but it does also help pull out these more roasty notes from the malt bill. Very, very nice, guys. In terms of the finish, yeah, it's a barrel-aged Imperial Stout with some additives, so it is long. This one, and I don't remember the first, and of course it's its own beer, so we don't need to keep mentioning it, but on this one, it's longer than average, but not over the top. It is barrel aged. It does have nice, big, bold, pungent flavors, and it does do a good job of coating the palate. But this one doesn't linger quite as long as I would expect maybe for a beer in this ABV range. It is above average, make no mistake, but I was expecting maybe a bit more drive out of it. That said, as expected on a big Imperial Stout, it's wet and round all the way to the end. And the driving factor on the end of the finish on this one is lingering bits of barrel and strongly coffee. That's the residual. The vanilla gets out of the way quicker than the other flavor compounds, but you are left with a bit of barrel. I would say barrel to coffee ratio is about 30-70. So it definitely drives with the coffee that lingers on the palate before it's finally out of the way. Another very, very nice beer, guys. This is a really good pastry stout. Doing these can be a bit tricky when you're doing additives because without that lactose addition that wipes out the pastry stout side of the subclass of what they're doing, it does take a bit more of a deft hand. So the balancing and everything does take a lot more work. And that is one key on this beer I think that they really, really got right. The balance on this I absolutely love. Regardless, this is another good one, guys. I'm going to take my time, sip on this beer, call it my scores. When we come back, we will get this one ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Wicked Weed Brewing Company's barrel-aged Guilty Pleasures line, Espresso Cheesecake. An Imperial Pastry Stout that clocks in at 12.2% ABV. This one brewed with coffee and vanilla, Wicked Weed is based in Asheville, North Carolina. So guys, this was yet another good beer out of this line. I got a couple more. It was a 4-pack. This reminded me a lot of the others, but there were some distinct differences. So this beer did extremely well across the board, but there were 4 specific categories where it did not get a perfect 10 out of 10. So we will jump straight to those categories in question. The first of those was the body. So the body on this was robust. It was definitely high end, well above average, but it wasn't quite top tier for me for a 12.2%. Indeed, it did feel a little less robust than the last one that I tried. Not that we're making a direct comparison, but it did not make quite the top echelon, but it only missed it by a hair. The body gets a 9 out of 10. The second category is the mouthfeel. Very much similar to the body. Yes, you could feel the resistance, and yes, you could feel it as you moved around the palate. But again, it wasn't quite as resistant as I expected given the ABV range for the beer style. But much like the body, it only missed it by a hair. The mouthfeel also gets a 9 out of 10. The third category was the finish. So the finish on this was nice. It was definitely above average. It is a 12.2% ABV Imperial Barrel-Aged Pastry Stout after all. But that's actually part of the reason that I was kind of expecting it to be longer than it was. This one didn't have quite the staying power, and I was actually a little bit shocked by that, especially considering that this one, compared to the first of these similar styled beers that I tried from Wicked Weed, had quite a bit more intensity to it kind of out of the gate. But this one had a bigger drive out of the underlying bitters and a lot more roastiness. That, in general, I do expect to linger around on the palate longer than your average. And yeah, like I said, it was above average, but it wasn't upper echelon, and that did surprise me a little bit. Still above average, though. The finish gets a 7 out of 10. The final category that I did not give a perfect score was my subjective thoughts category. I really enjoyed this beer, and particularly the underlying malt bill in this one and the bitters that kicked out of it, but I was just kind of hoping for a little bit more. You know, knowing it's a pastry stout and it didn't have lactose, I didn't expect kind of the cheesecake element of their nomenclature to pop out. Just added coffee and vanilla, just. It was really good. Delicious, guys. But frankly, if you're going to call beer Espresso Cheesecake, I am going to want some additional ingredients in there. Maybe some graham cracker crust you throw in there. Maybe some cinnamon or nutmeg, something to make it pop. That wasn't added to the beer. It didn't detract from the beer, but for my money, if you're going to call something cheesecake beer, it needs to have some line of elements of cheesecake. Vanilla was the only one. Yes, there's vanilla that you put in the mixture when you're mixing up the cream cheese and what have you, but it was missing every other element for my money. And look, it's my subjective thoughts, so it is what it is. But I did still think it was well above average. Subjectively, I did give it an 8 out of 10, which does leave a perfect 10 out of 10 in the remaining 6 categories. That's aroma, taste, head and retention, appearance, balance, and example of style. So the total score on Wicked Weed Brewing Company's barrel-aged Guilty Pleasures Espresso Cheesecake, it's a mouthful, is a 93 out of 100. So 4 categories, it did not get a perfect score, but it didn't miss the mark by much, guys. This is well above average. Really, the most I could say was I would have liked a little more of the cheesecake kind of side to come out of its namesake. But what I did get out of this beer was absolutely fantastic. Very rich, very roasty. I really, in particular, like the coffee back. I just would have liked a little more play on the cheesecake side of its namesake. Guys, that is today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications by hitting that bell icon. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.